this is the good news, and also meaning gospel. And today, in the Gospel of Mark, this biblical story was told orally for many years, and then it came into written form somewhere around 90 AD. Most biblical scholars have deduced that it's the earliest written narrative or interpretation of the oral storytelling of the good news, the story teachings and traditions of Jesus. For this early following of Jesus Christ, the story of the good news kept the community in touch with one another. The scripture passage reflects on how well known Jesus was and his teachings were to that first century community. Storytelling shared these ideas. It's why we have Netflix today and other shows, because they contain a good storyline and inspiring characters and a story that has a good message or meaning. It gives us hope. So is today's scripture reading like The Bachelor? Or maybe is it like the Netflix series Messiah? How about Tiger King? Maybe it's like Love is Blind. Or how about the Great British Baking Show? I know I've had a lot of help by baking during this time. And even if you're not a baker, how about Nailed It? Or The Outlander? Or Better Call Saul? Or Breaking Bad? Or it could be Breaking Good News, or the Good News of Mark. So today's scripture, or episode, in the Breaking Good News of the Gospel of Mark, we are in season 2, episode 7, and today's episode begins with a flashback. And as the camera zooms in, it focuses on Jesus' hand, and there's barley breadcrumbs in his hand. And then we get a flashback of the little boys carrying 2 tilapia fish and 5 loaves of bread from feeding the 5,000. And then the camera comes in and we see the fog. And all of a sudden we see Jesus walking across the lake, and he looks and he climbs into the boat, and Peter looks at him and he says, I don't get this. Then the camera breaks again and we see the boat coming up onto the shore. And all we hear is the lapping of the water on the bow of the boat, and we hear the crunch of the sand from their sandals as they get out. And these disciples are exhausted, and Peter does not understand what has happened in this story. So as the disciples are getting out of the boat, the camera pans up, and in the distance we hear voices of people who say, that's the man, that's him, he's the one that heals. And people run to their homes, into their spaces, and they bring those that are sick. And it reminds me of that scene from Willy Wonka, where little Charlie is begging his grandfather to get out of bed. Come on, it's like everybody in the city has a golden ticket to go see Jesus. And in that, they bring those who are sick to him. And if they can just get close enough to touch his cloak, to be on the edge of understanding who he is, they will be healed. They sought out to discover what the healing power of Jesus Christ was. July 18th, 2018 marked the 100th birthday of Nelson Mandela, who had passed away in 2013. Mandela was a South African anti-apartheid revolutionary and political leader. He served as president of South Africa from 1994 to 1999. Nelson Mandela was the first black head of state in a democratic election. Previously in South Africa, the National Party's white-only government established apartheid, the system of racial segregation. Mandela's focus was on dismantling apartheid. He confronted institutionalized racism and initiated reconciliation. Mandela was imprisoned for 27 years for conspiring to overthrow the state of government of white supremacy. He was released in 1990 because of domestic and international pressure of a racial and civil war. Mandela emphasized reconciliation between the country's racial groups. From this, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was created to investigate past human rights abuses. Nelson Mandela was presented with the Nobel Prize in 1993. Nelson Mandela, born in South Africa, was baptized a Methodist. Both his parents were illiterate, but his mom, being a devout Christian, sent him to a Methodist school where an English teacher gave him the name Nelson. Nelson Mandela grew up with the teachings of Jesus Christ, and with those teachings and stories, he lived his life with faith and for social justice. He became a living way of compassion, empathy, and a love that people wanted to just get close enough to understand who he was. His story lives on, and it inspires others. Mandela lived a life of faith in Jesus Christ and became a legacy. Today, people all over the world seek out to poetically touch him and get close enough to understand who he is. In the summer of 2018, I had the opportunity and honor to sing with the Minnesota Chorale together with a group from Cape Town, South Africa. And yes, you know them, 2911. As many of you had come to see them and had the joy and honor to hear their music and their ministry. At this time, in 2018, we sang in many languages. Along with other languages, we learned each other's musical genre and styles. We sang together in German, Beethoven's Ninth, Freude, and Mandela was influential in creating the South African national anthem, which contains 5 different languages, which also includes English. He believed in the importance and the stories of the 5 different languages and the people that represented them to come together into unity and be represented in a national anthem. During our Minnesota concert experience at Orchestra Hall, Nelson Mandela's daughter spoke, and she shared a story of how she had to wait 10 years to see her dad in prison, from age 6 to age 16. When she arrived for this long anticipated day, preceded by lengthy and detailed paperwork, she was greeted by the sight of her dad behind glass. They could not touch, yet their hearts touched. And through their conversation and being reacquainted, they kissed the glass that was between them. She shared how her father loved music and saw it as a universal language. And she spoke of how Mandela inspired fellow prisoners to sing in jail to uplift their spirits. Being in touch in these uncertain times in the middle of a pandemic of the coronavirus, it is time for us to be united as a planet. No matter the format of technology that we are blessed with, we have the invitation to communicate with love and with the love of Christ. When we can begin to see one another as brothers and sisters, as a family, as equals, as neighbors, the compassion of Jesus Christ begins to live in us. The way of life, of peace and love that is beyond all understanding. It touches our hearts. It is being in touch with one another. I'm going to close today with some quotes by Nelson Mandela. It always seems impossible until it's done. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. There is no passion to be found playing small. In setting for a life that is less than the one you are capable of living. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. If you talk to a man in a language he understands, then it goes to his head. If you talk to him in his own language, then it goes to his heart. For to be free, it is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. The greatest glory in living lies not in never failing, but in rising in every time we fail. A good head and a good heart are always a formidable combination, but when you add to it a literate tongue or pen, then you have something very special. And that is good news. Amen.